Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. My guest today is a fellow host on this broadcast, JBS. It's David Harris. He hosts the weekly JBS program Defending Israel, and he is a lifelong Jewish activist. He was referred to by the late Israeli President Shimon Peres as, quote, the foreign minister of the Jewish people. David has been honored more than 20 times by foreign governments for his international work, making him the most decorated American Jewish organizational leader in U.S. history. Throughout the past 5 decades, he's played a pivotal role in helping rescue Ethiopian Jewry and Soviet Jewry and helping expand Israel's diplomatic footprint throughout the world. He's the author of several books and hundreds of op-eds and articles. His memoir, On the Front Lines, A Lifetime of Global Jewish Advocacy, was published last year. That's 2024. His most recent book, published now, this month, by Oxford University Press, is titled Antisemitism, What Everyone Needs to Know. It could not be more timely. I'm so glad to be with you here on our mutual set.
It's a pleasure to be on the other side of the table.
Got to keep you on your toes, David. So the motivation for this book, I'm sure you've been asked before, but there are books about anti-Semitism, particularly one by Deborah Lipstadt, who I know is a colleague and friend, Barry Weiss recently. What did you feel was missing and needed to be said?
I have to be honest with you, Abby, it was not my idea. I was up near the Columbia University area 2 years ago. My phone rang. A woman said, my name is Nancy Toff. I'm the executive editor of Oxford University Press, and I'd like to talk to you about writing a book. I was sure it was a prank call by one of my grandchildren or daughters-in-law.
That happens all the time. You have 8 grandchildren.
We do, but and some of them do pranks. But this was not a prank call, and she said to me, we need a book that is designed for the average New York Times reader. We don't want a book that's focused on scholars who are going to argue over the placement of a semicolon or a date in the 13th century. There's an immediate problem, and we need readers to understand it. Can you write that book for us? So it was their idea, not mine. I was both flattered and frightened.
Frightened why?
Frightened because I know from experience that writing a book is a daunting, grueling, and lonely exercise. You know, after the excitement of getting the phone call, right, which is very uplifting, you know, you then go and say, well, wait a second. I mean, there have been some wonderful books written. You've cited a few. So where's the space here? And with Oxford University Press, everything is peer-reviewed. At every stage. So from conception through mid-stage to final stage, it's all peer-reviewed by anonymous experts. You're never told who they are. So you have layer upon layer upon layer. So for me, it's sort of the literary equivalent of trying to climb Mount Everest.
And you're being vetted every step of the way. Every
step of the way, and then some. And knowing about the controversies built in even to the subject of anti-Semitism today. You know, what is not, how does anti-Zionism fit into it? You know, I wasn't sure what awaited me. But I have to say, Oxford University Press turned out to be a fantastic partner. Any concerns I might have had were unfounded. And 2 years later, the book is out.
And it's a very important kind of, I would say, primer at a time when people are really feeling more shaken, even now, than they thought they would be after this war was done, or at least there was a ceasefire. How did you kind of define the landscape in terms of your research, in terms of your approach? Can you just give us a sense of kind of what the book tells?
Well, if I had any advantages, so to speak, in writing the book, it was not that I was a scholar that had spent years in the library. It was that I was a practitioner of anti-Semitism. You know, I had seen it play out in hundreds of ways here in the United States and around the world. I had been involved with the efforts to define anti-Semitism, to define strategies, to assess practices, both best and worst. So I had that advantage, if you will, And secondly, I had the advantage, so to speak, of coming from a family which had experienced anti-Semitism from all of the major sources.
I just want to quote you here. In your acknowledgments, you write that your mother first suffered from the Bolsheviks, then from the Nazis, and your wife experienced brutal Jew hatred in her native Libya.
Yeah, and you're probably missing my father, who was a survivor of Nazism. So I had Bolshevism, the far left, I had Nazism/fascism, the far right, and I had jihadism from my wife. So these were not fourth cousins, on my grandmother's side.
Hypothetical.
These were the three people in my life closest to me. So I had a 360-degree perspective. Those were the advantages I brought, and I felt I could write for a New York Times average reader audience. I could not write for the scholarly association. So I constructed the book with 10 chapters. I began retrospectively, what is anti-Semitism? Can we all agree on what it is or can be? Anti-Semitism, the Christian world. Anti-Semitism, the Muslim world. Anti-Semitism is a racial phenomenon as it morphed from religious to racial. Anti-Semitism, the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism in the communist world. Anti-Semitism in Europe, re-emerging. Anti-Semitism crosses the Atlantic. And most importantly, perhaps, Abby, because it's not about description particularly, it's meant to be about prescription. Okay, thank you, David. Now we know, but what do we do about it? And that's the question I keep coming up against. What do we do about it?
And before we get there, can you, I know it's hard to encapsulate where things are now, but the reason why that publisher's calling you is because something felt exigent, urgent now. How would you describe where anti-Semitism is?
Well, we can spend the rest of the conversation,
right.
and I promise you we won't. But by my calculation, in the last 7 years, meaning from 2018 to 2025, more Jews have been killed as Jews in the United States of America than in the years from 1654 to 2018, which by my count is about 364 years.
Wow.
So when you speak about exigencies, urgencies, let's start right there.
And when you say as Jews, killed as Jews, solely because they are Jews. That's
because they went to the Tree of Life synagogue, because they went to the kosher food store in New Jersey, because they were celebrating Hanukkah in Rockland County, because they attended an AJC event at the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., because they attended a pro-Israel event in Boulder, Colorado, or in San Diego. I can keep going.
No.
I mean as Jews.
Right.
So that alone should be sufficient. Then when you add to it the statistics from credible sources, whether the FBI, which says that up to 70% of all religiously based hate crimes in the United States focus on just over 2% of the population. When you focus on NYPD statistics here in New York, that Jews are roughly 10 times more likely to be victims of hate crimes than any other religious community in the United States, including Muslims. And then you go to Britain, to France, to Germany, to Belgium, to Sweden. The evidence is overwhelming, Abby.
And it's not Jewish evidence. It's...
No, it's not Jewish evidence, and it's not, Jewish Schreingewalt, as they say, or to the cynics, Jewish fear-mongering.
Right, it's unimpeachable.
And then you travel to Europe, as I do regularly, and you speak to people, including my own family, my family in France, my wife's family in Italy, and the conversation has changed. The central question has become, for many, do we have a future here? Or do we have to consider alternatives? So the whole conversation has changed, Abby. I can't tell you when Oxford University Press called me that they had all of this in mind, but they knew enough of what was going on to say, there's a book that's needed now, in this moment, filling this space for the general public.
You describe anti-Semitism as an enduring and infinitely adaptable conspiracy theory. Can you say a little more about that?
Jews provide, historically and currently, a very convenient, one-size-fits-all explanation. Take your pick. COVID, 9/11. We could talk about Israel, but whatever occurs, economic depression.
Charlie Kirk,
the Great Replacement Theory. I mean, all of these things, they happen, and within a moment, you'll see the anti-Semites surfacing from the far right, from the far left, from the jihadist world, fueled by the social media that Joseph Goebbels in the 1930s could only have dreamed about. I mean, just imagine a Goebbels, the chief propagandist for the Third Reich, with the power of TikTok and Instagram and YouTube.
it's chilling.
And before you know it, these lies have circled the world. And what I've found, Abby, is that there is a very large group of people in the world, including right here in the United States, who are pre-wired, predisposed to want to believe these things no matter how preposterous.
Right.
Because it's just been layer upon layer in Western civilization, to a large degree in Islamic civilization, that has, over centuries through generations, essentially told people the Jews are responsible for poisoning the waters. The Jews are responsible for murdering Christian children on the eve of Passover. The Jews are responsible for economic collapse. The Jews are responsible for stabbing us in the back. Germany, World War I, the stab in the back theory. So we fast forward to today, and we cannot simply disassociate history and say we live in the moment. This is thousands of years in the making.
Your chapter on anti-Semitism in the Christian world cites Rowan Williams' reflection on centuries of Christian complicity. How much of modern anti-Semitism, even today, still carries the residue of religious anti-Judaism?
I can't quantify it for you, but let's remember that the lifting of the deicide charge, so to speak, only occurred in 1965. Now, some would say, well, David, that was 60 years ago. True.
And explain for anyone who might not understand how it was lifted officially.
The Second Vatican Council gathered in Rome. It was a 3-year-long process, and they took a number of very important decisions. One was called Nostra Aetate, it's all Latin, which, if you will, lifted from the shoulders of the Jews the eternal responsibility for the killing of the Son of God in Christian theology. And that was a revolution. And my former organization, AJC, played an important role there. But it overlooks the fact that until 1965, how many generations were taught to believe that Jews were the Christ killers and had to pay an eternal price? And how many, not just individuals and churches, but how much did it enter into Western culture? I mean, when you look at something like The Merchant of Venice, or you look at Canterbury Tales, or you look at people like T.S. Eliot, these are pillars of our Western civilization.
And foundations of American education.
When I traveled to Japan for the first time in 1988, I discovered the only play that was being introduced into the Japanese school system in the high school level was The Merchant of Venice. Not necessarily because of the Jewish angle,
Right.
but for whatever reason. Hence,
That's all they got.
in Japan, which has virtually no Jews, the first and only exposure to Jews was the Shakespearean portrayal of a Jew, a malevolent Jew. And in the absence of counter evidence, it could take root. You can just go around the world and see this. Richard Wagner, I mean, all of these things were so embedded. So it's not so easy to uproot. And in the Christian world, we have to talk not just about the Catholic Church decision, or you mentioned Rowan Williams, which was the Anglican Church, but we still have tussles with some aspects of evangelical Christianity. You know, are we doomed to go to hell if we don't embrace Jesus? We still hear these things. There are other evangelical leaders who repudiate it, but there's a tussle within the evangelical world. So these issues are not over and done, file them in the cabinet.
And has the church done enough to repair the legacy? I know that that's like the church is too broad, but...
Look, here it spills into the elephant in any room today, which is Israel, and the degree to which how one deals with Israel affects how one views Jews. And I think there are a number of Jews who would say today that the Catholic Church, for example, has disappointed for all of its occasional expressions of friendship and outreach to Jews, that Pope Francis, until his recent passing, and now his successor, have not been as understanding of Israel as they might be. And it raises questions about whether this is simply a political assessment or something deeper. And by the way, let's remember that with the Vatican, for example, and I think I mentioned this elsewhere in the book, the Vatican is one of the few places in the world where the World War II and the Holocaust are still being battled over. Pope Pius XII, who was the Pope during the Holocaust, what did he do? Did he do enough to try and save Jews? Did he not do enough? I can show you eminent authorities on both sides of the issue, and it's still being battled over today. And it's not disconnected, because for many Jews, there is an enduring suspicion of the Catholic Church, while for others, no. The Catholic Church made a huge leap forward in 1965, and we embrace it. Poland is another great example where these issues are still being battled over. How anti-Semitic was Poland before the war? Though attacked by the Nazis, how complicit were they with the Nazis in the killing of Jews? How much or how little responsibility has Poland taken for its previous history? And what's the fate of research on the Holocaust in Poland today? These are living issues.
You mentioned Israel and how it's obviously
How could I not?
How could you not? In your discussion of Ilan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, you note the blurring of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. So where, again, I know each one of these is an hour by itself, where do you draw the legitimate line between criticism of Israel and the delegitimization of Jewish existence?
I take my cue here from Natan Sharansky, the former Soviet prisoner of conscience, and actually one of my personal heroes in life. And he tackled this question in the early 2000s. I think it came around the Durban conference, which itself was a trigger point for many about this sort of resurgence and explosion of anti-Semitism in so-called respectable places, not on the margins, but at a UN-sponsored conference in Durban, South Africa. And he came up with what became known as the 3 Ds as his standard to answer your question, Abby. And I think the 3 Ds make a lot of sense. And I repeat them in the book. I don't try and embellish them. And essentially what he said is, criticism, of course. All you have to do is sit in the Knesset or read Haaretz, and you'll know that...
Or read the Talmud. You'll see disagreement.
There you go, every page of the Talmud. But he said, when it becomes double standards, and one standard is applied to Israel, for example, in the realm of defense, but not to any other nation on earth, or delegitimization, that what you're really after is not criticizing this or that policy, but questioning the very right of the Jewish people to self-determination, while affirming the right of everyone else, including the Palestinians and every other nation, or demonization, that you resort to such demonic images of Israel. You put, and I've seen this in cartoons in Spain, for example, you put Nazi uniforms on the IDF, and you label the Gaza Strip as the new Warsaw Ghetto, and the West Bank as the new Auschwitz. So you transfer Nazi images, for example, which were used for the perpetration of the genocide against the Jewish people, and now invert history to superimpose those demonic images on Jews. That's his standard. And I think his standard makes sense.
And in terms of how to kind of practicalize his standard, can you say a recommendation that you have in terms of helping people see those 3Ds when they're happening? Because you can see the pressure, particularly on anyone under 30, to kind of have to almost defend their own identity if they stand with Israel at all.
So in my career, I've had hundreds, I'm sure thousands of meetings with diplomats, foreign ministers and others. I remember one meeting from a so-called friendly country. This was years before October 7th, where he began very generously by saying, Mr. Harris, I want you to know that my country, it was a West European country, my country recognizes Israel's right to exist. And that was supposed to be a gift to me that I was meant to embrace and kiss him on both cheeks. And instead, I took a deep breath and I said, sir, I'm happy to tell you that the American Jewish Committee recognizes your country's right to exist. And now can we get on to the discussion, please? I don't think in a world in which it's hard to explain theoretically the right of the United States to exist, or Canada, or Australia, or to explain why virtually every Latin American country, in my experience, has been ruled by people of European stock, or why in North Africa, all of the countries in North Africa are ruled by Arabs who came from thousands of miles away to invade and colonize and conquer. I don't know why Israel is uniquely singled out and its right to exist is questioned, when by those standards, Israel's right is exponentially much higher. I also don't know why, if Israel is threatened with existential threats. For example, let's take October the 7th. 1,200 Israelis, as we all know, were killed on that one day, and 251 were kidnapped. In American demographic terms, 1,200 translates into 42,000 Americans. 251 translates into more than 8,000 Americans who would have been kidnapped. Mind you, on September 11th, roughly 3,000 Americans were killed. On December 7th in Pearl Harbor, nearly 3,000 Americans were killed. In both cases, we went to war, which we saw as just wars. And no one questioned our right to go to war, to the extent of carpet bombing and even dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan and killing how many civilians in the process? So in those nations' mind, that's fine. When France tried to hold on to Algeria, and roughly 1 million people were killed in the 8-year war, in which France eventually lost. From the French point of view, that was fine. They were legitimate in their needs.
Response.
But when Israel, not seeking to occupy someone else's territory through conquest, but defending itself against Hamas and genocidal terror, seeks to respond, the pattern is very predictable, Abby. On day one, except for the North Koreas and the Irans, everyone is sympathetic. You can almost feel the tears on the press release statements. By day 2 and day 3, the conversation shifts to much more of, we call on all sides to pull back, no disproportionate response, international human rights law. There's a whole new language that enters into it, and by day 4 or 5, people have forgotten October 7th, people have forgotten the 1,200, and instead are talking about Israeli excesses and alleged war crimes. And this is being fed by some so-called human rights groups that we know, some media outlets that we know, some UN officials that we know, and UN institutions, by the Muslim Brotherhood, by Qatar, Iran, Turkey. There's a whole network. So something's going on here, and it's much bigger simply than, I'm not sure Israel's doing the right thing.
And you do give us some to-do list, but one of the biggest hurdles is social media, and the fact that, I'm sure you've seen the statistics on the number of people who get their entire news from TikTok. What is the way to combat the the way information is being absorbed right now?
You know, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. And for a mythology that says Jews control the media, as part of the anti-Semitic landscape, so to speak, we're doing a terrible job. Whether it's traditional media or whether it's new social media. Look, what I've been trying to do all my adult life, 50 years in the Jewish world, is not just to analyze or to preach, it's to mobilize. The goal of this book, like the goal of my career, has been to try and get people, in this case I hope both Jews and non-Jews, to say there's something very wrong here. We don't have to love Jews, we don't have to give them a special attention or special privileges, but the sense that liberal democracy would protect Jews in the post-war era, that we were now a new society where you could still be anti-Semitic, but it would be relegated to the margins. That if you said it in the mainstream, it would be taboo. You just wouldn't do it. All of that's been shattered, Abby. Yeah. So we're living in a new world where you can be a member of Congress, by the way, from the right and from the left, and you can express anti-Semitic views, and not only will you keep your job, but you'll be re-elected, as we've seen, and you'll get support from the party's central bank, so to speak. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ilhan Omar, I give you other examples. So lots of things have changed.
But it's important to note that they couldn't be further apart on the political spectrum. So it's coming from...
But my whole point has been, if you're serious about fighting anti-Semitism, and you're not just weaponizing it to advance your own side, so to speak, you need a 360-degree perspective. It's very nice for Democrats to call out Republicans and Republicans to call out Democrats. But I want Democrats to call out Democrats and Republicans to call out Republicans. And I don't want people to be so afraid of that third rail designation of Islamophobia that they ignore what's going on, not by Muslims, but within the Muslim world. So my goal is to mobilize people to say, if you read this book, even if you read one chapter, don't put it aside. Do something. And I offer some things to do. You're not single-handedly going to solve the social media problem. You're not single-handedly going to solve the university problem or the UN problem. But do something. And to the extent that you're members of churches, synagogues, community groups, national organizations, demand that they do more. And not just more, but more smartly. And one of my points is, too many are way behind the 8 ball here. Way behind. They're still playing by an October 6th playbook.
David Harris, thank you. The book is Anti-Semitism, What Everyone Needs to Know. I'm Abigail Pogrebin for In the Spotlight. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you next time.